Yuri, here we are. Can you believe it? Just only 117 episodes ago, we had a chat on tech talent. Time flies, and I guess we've been busy, haven't we?
Yeah. Hey, Brian. Long time no see, I guess, but not really because we see each other every day. But yeah, it's been an intense 2 years. So yeah, I'm glad to be back and share some of the learnings from the field as well.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about today. An update on the business, and also maybe we can share a little bit what we've learned in these past couple of years. I think we got to kind of group together kind of 2020 and 2021 were very distinct. And then 22 came along, particularly in the second half, and things have changed quite a bit. I'd love to get your perspective a little bit on kind of this transition that we've been in, and how are you seeing things today compared to when we started?
Yeah, so we've been hard at work on building teams and products at Latitude. For those who don't know, we also build software products for founders. And that kind of like gave us a deep insight into the market right now on how the talent market is and the recruiting. I think we started right around the time when things were just kind of getting out of control with valuations and high demand for tech talent. We saw a lot of trends for global compensation. We saw folks kind of getting more and more of the US and European salaries. We saw, strong competition from international players in LATAM. LATAM is very convenient, right? Especially for US companies due to time zones. So a lot of that was happening. And then now we're seeing more of kind of like folks pumping the brakes. Everybody's on, LinkedIn and other news kind of outlets seeing layoffs. And with the economic kind of downturn, a lot of the tech companies were impacted. And so now we're seeing a lot of kind of talent being put back into the ecosystem. I think it's clear that the global compensation discussion is kind of dead. I think for now, it's, again, the employer's market. Again, folks are going back to local compensation. And Alex from Deal, CEO of Deal, has mentioned that in one of his posts. That's the data that they're kind of getting as well across the board.
I think, frankly, it's quite difficult for local companies making local currency to compete with global players. So, it is a more fluid job market probably than 10 years ago, but the last, 2 years, things seem to have slowed down. And I mean, it's, there was a huge layoff in Google, for example, that included some, some of the engineering as well, and all across the board. So I think it's safe to say that, not, just these, people saw this flight to safety in big tech. And, I think that that's proven, yesterday I had a call with the head of, Mexico, Twitter, and, that whole entire office was closed. Right. So there's this big kind of transformation in the last couple, call it 6 months, has really evidence that, I still think there's a buoyant local tech market that can, absorb this, some of these layoffs, but it's definitely kind of shifted back to what it was kind of pre-spike, right, that we saw in 2020 and 2021.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of interesting. We always talk about this at Latitude, right? Like that these kind of downturns or a crisis coming upon us is actually an opportunity. Is actually an entrepreneurial starter. So a lot of folks, I think it was Alex Torrenegra, he mentioned that in one of his posts, that a lot of these folks that were laid off actually super capable, entrepreneurial-minded folks that will go ahead and start companies. So we might even see a kind of a renaissance of startups coming out of that situation. And what I've observed is that a lot of these like startups have kind of inflated themselves a little bit, right? So in that crazy chase for market share, and we had 10, 12 years of abundance of capital, there's just been a lot of hiring and a lot of inflating of the teams. And so to some degree, folks are kind of adjusting back to reality, to the actual revenue numbers, to actual growth numbers that they have, knowing that the follow-on capital may not be as easily available. So yeah, we're definitely seeing that slowdown and kind of readjustment to the new reality. But yeah, I think folks that are like, that are strong, that have strong metrics, strong revenue, will continue to thrive and just be more focused for this period of time.
Yeah, I think that to your point, there's a greater emphasis on productivity, it seems like, and that is a healthy thing, right? I remember at Viva Real, and this is always something that stuck with me. We had we struggled with engineering, particularly in the beginning, because we didn't have a technical co-founder. I've been very vocal about one of the reasons why we partnered is because I was like, I'm not making that mistake again. And the reflection there was at one point we decided to shift this to this more engineering product mentality inside the company, and in it kind of taking inspiration from Marcos Galperin, who I remember Hernan Casá and Nico Sakazi, two of the founders of Kazek and founders of Meli. They shared the story of how Marcos got up and physically moved his desk and his computer and sat right in the middle of engineering. And I think that, it's one thing that I did just to kind of send a message to the organization that, hey, we're focusing on this. But it's interesting how the pendulum kind of swings. And then all of a sudden I was like looking at the budget for the next year and I was like, I want 50 engineers, and that also is an unhealthy approach because, the classic kind of Warren Buffett of, 9 women can't make a baby in 1 month is the same with engineering. Maybe you can share a little bit more about your reflections on productivity of teams.
Yeah, you have to be definitely mindful. I've had those goals set for myself, at some of the companies I've been at, by investors. Like investors will give you those goals because they do have, a large pool of companies that they're looking at. So they can benchmark and kind of suggest. But the reality is you really have to look at your own roadmap and your velocity and like the business goals and to see if you're meeting them. And then, it's been shown by research that top engineers are like 150, 200 times more productive than the average engineer. So the math doesn't work out the way it does maybe with some of the other roles. I don't know, I'm just thinking here, maybe customer success, where there's a certain amount of time that you have to cover, right, for a certain number of customers. And it's more predictable. With these kind of jobs where you have creative leverage by writing code, you just have to understand the dynamic of, hey, small teams, tight product surface, and then just like the productivity is massive versus, the more bodies you kind of throw at the problem, the communication overhead becomes unmanageable. And then, of course, you have to have multiple layers of management. You have to have, committees and this and that. It's a lot of times, you kind of actually end up slowing things down by throwing a lot of people at the problem.
Yeah, on the contrary of that, like, we've talked internally and, we're big kind of proponents of building in public. And, we kind of got off to a little slow start in terms of hiring, from our kind of standards. And, the positive to that is that we were able to hire some really incredibly talented people. And so you kind of go a little slower to go fast later. What are your reflections on that? And, how do you kind of see that moving forward? I know it's not about volume of people, it's about the quality of people, but, what are some of your reflections on that? And, how do you kind of anticipate 2023 will be different than 2022 for us from an engineering team?
Yeah, I think the thing that's non-negotiable for me is always the bar. You have to keep the bar extremely high. So no matter what the challenges are ahead, you just cannot, lower your bar, or at least, it's one of the things you have to take very seriously, because if you hire the wrong person for solving a problem, then now you have two problems, right? You still have the original problem, and now you have to deal with the person you hired in some way, right? Like it's probably management overhead or helping them and supporting them. So I think taking the time makes sense. Looking back, this is one of the advices I would give to folks is take the time to hone in on your hiring strategy and understanding exactly how that's going to impact your business. Because, in our case, we kind of had a tall order, right? Like we wanted folks in Latam that spoke English, that had that like super experienced profile. And that's just like super difficult to find, especially in in the hype times. I'm glad we didn't buy into the hype, because if we started paying, folks, these kind of like US Silicon Valley salaries, and now things have gone down, that's no longer a reality. We would have been kind of stuck with the really difficult scenario in our hands. So I think the learning from there is being extremely clear about your strategy and kind of like what impact that has on the time that you're going to take to hire, and also kind of like your business overall.
And I think that there's a temptation when you raise a lot of money, to hire very senior people. And, in one case, we looked at bringing on, kind of a senior VP of engineering at one point, and we interviewed a few that we really loved, and we thought they would be great assets for the company. But you wisely pointed out, hey, look, we need people that are executing. We don't need, a lot of people management at this stage because the team is small, and, you're more than capable of managing the team at the size it is. And, you don't need the exact support if we're, only scaling, one or two products at this point. And so there's two kind of questions in here. One is the CTO versus VP of engineering kind of role, how you think about that. And then two, what are some of the mistakes that I might have kind of hinted at of overhiring or hiring someone too senior or too early, and kind of how should founders think about that when they're building, their initial teams, let's call it pre-product market fit or early product market fit?
Yeah, I think the CTO versus VP of engineering, there's definitely a couple of flavors there. There's not like one size fits all, but probably more of a common path is that, the CTO will start the team out, build the initial product, and then grow the team initially. And then as they scale to more strategic role, or maybe they are taking on more of the product responsibility or something else, then they start needing somebody to support that kind of, because the engineering team, if you look at the trio, like that we usually see, right? Design, product, and engineers. Like engineering teams scale faster because you usually need, 5 to 8 engineers for each designer and PM. So yeah, you start needing that VP of engineering role to streamline the processes to start managing those folks. Bringing them too early is definitely a challenge. I think it's a twofold scenario. Number one is you might be hiring somebody from Amazon, Google, or Spotify that has built and managed teams of 150, 200, 500 engineers, which sounds impressive, but you just don't have that complexity right now, right? You might have 5 or 7 engineers. That means that this person, will basically completely change what they're doing on a daily basis. When they were maybe doing resource allocation, OKR planning, and strategic communication, now they're like having to dive into the code base and doing pull requests, review. So I think that's the first problem, is it just doesn't fit the scenario that you have. And the second problem is you kind of create layers of abstraction that are very, very dangerous. I think, as founders, when you're like pre-product market fit, you're building something new, you want to be super close to your customer and to your product teams. And if you add those like senior hires, you just create layers of abstraction where things may happen, or, you may kind of lose sight of what's going on and lose control. And then you only have so much time, right? Early stage companies. So like if you lose 6 to 8 months, that might be the only 6 to 8 months that you have. So definitely a pretty dangerous situation there.
What are your thoughts on the kind of classic dilemma of, I've seen the pendulum swing both ways on strong, firm arguments around like you need kind of the CTO over here, VP of engineering, and then you need a VP of product over here. And, maybe they'll both report to the CTO, or in some cases, there's this one unified role where, there's one person that has product engineering underneath them. How do you, what do you think the pros and the cons of those two different kind of, organizational structures are? And, what is your kind of inkling in terms of what you prefer?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a trade-off, right, between like maybe speed and balance. So if you have, product engineering kind of handled by the same person, the decisions are faster. You can move really quick because there's no debate, there's no argument, and things kind of roll up to the same person. When you separate those folks, you start having balance and also kind of being mindful of how large that scope is. So as the company grows, you start having all these deep engineering issues. I mean, you might be optimizing MongoDB clusters or something like that. It takes massive amount of technical knowledge. And on the other hand, you're also having to think about the roadmap and the competitors and the market size and things like that. So it's hell of a job to do all that at a scale company. So my take would be, usually, I mean, you're lucky if you have one technical / profile on the founding team, as we see at Latitude. So usually it's one person that kind of gets things going, builds the initial product and the team. And then I see it healthy as the company scales beyond a certain point to start separating those roles. And whether that's a VP of product, VP of engineering reporting to the CTO or whatever, or if you have like a CPO, CTO model, it is healthy to just create more balance and more of a kind of like a healthy debate there. And also kind of like being mindful of how much scope that those two roles really require.
Yuri, question for you. You, in your thesis, your master's thesis, I think you wrote a paper on artificial intelligence and how that may kind of replace some, engineering. And you wrote this. What is that correct? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, I was trying to take a stab at replacing engineers with with software or with machines. It was kind of early thoughts on the topic, and I think folks have been making a lot of progress on that as well. But
yeah. What year was that? What year did you write that?
I think it was 2010, something like that.
2010. All right, so we're in the Chat GPT era now, and things have changed quite a bit. Is it your sense that part of the future of engineering will you've seen these incredible interfaces for example landing pages where you can actually describe where the landing page, I want a dog, whatever dog walking app for and create a form, and then all of a sudden it spits out this design. In your mind, do you think that one of the next generation of engineering is going to be being able to manage the control panel of artificial intelligence and being able to direct artificial intelligence in a intelligent way that creates a shortcut for producing? So it becomes less about the deep skills of actually coding and more about managing. It's kind of like if you think back, maybe someone that was like really good at managing how to use a search engine in the beginning, that was just more efficient at finding information because they understood how to kind of engage with Google to extract the information you need. Is that going to become a skill of engineers in the future? And how far away are we from that in your mind?
Yeah, so like when I took a stab at it, it was sort of a similar idea. I was trying to observe the team I was working with. I was working at Cincinnati Children's Hospital, like one of the largest children's hospitals in the US. And I was observing a team that we had there, and a lot of it was kind of repetitive tasks around data extraction, data preparation for research, for medical research. And so I started noticing there are some patterns, right? So my thesis was kind of that idea is like, hey, can we use case-based reasoning to extract those patterns, to extract those kind of recipes, and like just combine them in the, kind of creative ways to create more and more complex programs. And so, my thesis was before this whole renaissance of AI happened, which is amazing to watch. I don't think I've been as close to this area to, claim myself an expert, but what I see is a lot of these tools are kind of evolving right now as more of the assistant. So we do have software now like Autopilot, for example, that helps engineers write code, and I think there'll be more and more of those. Where basically some of the mundane things that engineers have to do, go to Stack Overflow and find a snippet of the code that does, a specific task. Those things will be more and more kind of automated. And then more of the complex creative work around engineering will still remain. Maybe somebody needs to tweak the algorithm, invent a new algorithm. I think that'd be a bit harder. Although with time, who knows, maybe even that will be automated. So right now, I kind of see those stepping stone being an assistant, AI assistant for engineers, for writers, for everybody. Because like even with writers, I mean, you work a lot with copy, right? Like in communication, it's easy to see how something would help you write a good email to a partner, but it's hard to see something that would like write a novel or like write Harry Potter. Like it's a bit of a taller order. So we'll see how that evolves, but I kind of see the stepping stone being an assistant, and then who knows, maybe completely replacing some specific functions.
Transitioning a little bit, as a startup founder, I know that attracting top talent, is challenging, right? Like, I mean, I remember the first days of Viva Real, and we're trying to convince people to join, and it's like, you don't have a lot, and it's kind of like a lot of, excitement about what's coming in the future, but there's not anything really concrete in the beginning. what would you say is the importance of developing an attractive kind of employer brand? How can a startup effectively communicate its unique culture and value proposition to potential candidates?
Yeah, so for early folks, I think there's a simple realization that is important is people will join your startup because of you, not because of, your projections or your deck or all that stuff. Of course, the vision is important and the problem you're solving, but again, that's very attached to the founder, right? That's very attached to kind of what they believe in. So a lot of the times I just, kind of stating the obvious, but helping the founders realize like, hey, your network, people that trust you, people that you know well, are your best candidates to join on this crazy journey, because you're going like on this small plastic boat out in the open ocean, right? It's super dangerous. And people are like, okay, well, I've done some stuff with this person before, and I trust them. So that's kind of like the early stages. And then, of course, building in public is something I've learned from you. Like at Latitude, I think it's been super powerful. Just sharing what you're building, sharing why you're building it, how you're doing it, just kind of automatically engages a community of people around. And then when you need, to tap into that for referrals or for talent, you can definitely do that. I think one important idea is that if you're going after tech talent, it's important to have a tech brand, not just a brand, right? So even before we started kind of sharing more about the software that we're building and our engineering team practices, which we've been doing recently more and more openly, we would talk to folks. It's like, I love Latitude. It's amazing, but are you building software? Why do you need engineers? And so like creating that clarity and creating that clear message and delivering that, hey, we are a tech company, we're building these things, this is how we're doing it. So yeah, just having a brand that doesn't necessarily shortcut you to a good pool of technical talent.
Yeah, I think that's been a big initiative for us, right? In the last, call it, couple months, we've had to transition in some more, public declaration that we're building tech products, that we're building a tech company. Because what happens is you end up getting pigeonholed in whatever, kind of initial thing that you do. And it's like, Latitude, is a fund because we've made investments. Latitude is a community. Those are all correct. But unless you're intentional about how you position yourself, and at the core of what we're doing, we're building a venture-backed company. We've raised venture capital. We see an incredible opportunity to reduce friction for early stage founders in Latin America. And we have the thesis that we can build tremendous value and upside for investors and for ourselves as founders and all the shareholders by building software that helps founders. And we think there's an incredible opportunity there. But if we don't kind of manifest that and state that, we get kind of thrown into this bucket of, and I think it's a great lesson in just owning the narrative about your business. I experienced the same kind of experience when, I was building my last company, and we were this, prop tech company, and there was a handful of other prop tech companies coming up. And we weren't on the fundraising circuit because we were kind of more of a mature company. We were working towards profitability. And when these other companies came to market, they kind of communicated what our positioning was because we weren't owning our own narrative. And then at that point, the perception of us was completely, I would say, disconnected or slightly disconnected with the reality. And so I think the lesson there is if you don't tell your own story, someone else will. And so you've got to control the airwaves about your business. Otherwise, you're going to end up, being perceived in a certain way. And we have had these recent discussions about perception is reality in some cases. And, in the case of how people see you, that I think that's a good example of making sure that you can kind of control that narrative. So for everyone listening, we've transformed into a tech company, and that's why I think this important this conversation is important.
Yeah, and I just want to share a few tactical things for folks to actually do, to build that tech brand. I mean, number one, you can very simply just like put a spotlight on your team. So if you have a few engineers, be vocal about it, why you brought them on, what experience they have. Kind of like you see companies do this, like spotlighting, putting spotlight on their team members. That's one. Another one is just starting something like a tech blog where you could write, in your initial architecture decisions about things you're building, kind of like the solutions you're coming up with. And right now we launched another initiative, which is Tech Talks, obviously to help early stage founders in Latin America kind of like get more of an abundance of that talent and more folks excited about early stage. but it also helps us kind of flesh out our thinking in terms of tech and kind of invite the best minds to the table. We've done this at Escali. It was very, very effective as well, because when I joined Escali, it was kind of viewed more as like a marketing and sales organization. And then by doing this, by sharing, through Tech Talks and inviting the community to us, we kind of quickly built a tech brand.
Speaking of Tech Talks, I ran into Andre Peña, who is from Quinto Andar. This week we had dinner, and he politely accepted and with enthusiasm to join our next Tech Talk. So hopefully we'll have him on here soon. He's built an incredible tech organization. I think they have 800 people in their product engineering team. They've built incredible products. It's definitely a renowned product in Brazil, and they're expanding across Latin America. So great to have more of those people sharing their experience. And I love having not just CTOs or heads of technology organizations, but he's a founder also. So he was in the trenches building the first MVP, doing the scheduling, manually to visit the properties, and then it's like, okay, let's automate this out, and I think it'll be a great conversation. So looking forward to that one as well.
Yeah, amazing. I'm also looking forward to that. The first one, for those of you who couldn't join, we had with Dani from Corner Shop, also amazing story, built it from day zero. And also we had Jared, one of our own engineers, principal engineer on our team. And the next one is coming on the March 13th. We're going to talk to James, who's a product manager for Kotlin at Google. Kotlin is a new language that's quickly growing. And he's going to talk about how Google transitioned to it and how it could be useful for early stage folks as well.
Now, let's see. Startups, we've got limited resources, right? And that makes it a little difficult to compete with larger companies for tech talent, especially if consider the kind of work from anywhere scenario. So usually you highlight the importance of soft skills for tech workers, which I hate the word soft skills because soft skills are hard. So we shouldn't call them soft skills. We should call them hard.
There's nothing, nothing harder than soft skills.
And there's nothing soft about having the ability to communicate and listen, and it's important for leadership. So any examples of when that made a huge difference when solving a tech challenge? And I ask this question because I think you're very skilled at this. I've had the pleasure of working with you now for, I'm going to say it in months, about 30 plus months, which, we've had very few altercations, and you're just a very clear communicator. You communicate your needs very well. You don't come in emotionally charged on things, and you're a good listener. So talk a little bit more about how companies can assess those skills, because I found that the engineers that have the technical capacity combined with the ability to communicate and work in a team environment, they have massively larger impact on their organization. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, definitely important to have solid soft skills, for early tech hires. And everything I talk about is like I try to bring to the reality of early stage startups, because that's what we live and breathe at Latitude. One of the things I've noticed is that, early on, the team is just so small that it feels like you have roommates, it's like you're always together and you're just bumping into each other. So if somebody is not easygoing or not positive or, just hard to work with, it can be super brutal, right? Like it's just hard to survive. So just being mindful of that side of things, just like we have a virtue, right, of glass half full, seeing things in positive light, reacting in a positive way. Important. And also communication is the one that I kind of observed over the years with technical talent and engineers. Especially communication often gets overlooked. It's like, oh, well, this person is a genius with code. They can do all these things. And then communication kind of becomes a second priority. I think for early stage, especially, it's super important, right? Because if you don't have early engineers with that product mentality, with that solid communication, then you're paying a huge tax basically on every single email, every single Slack message, every single meeting where you have to kind of translate back and forth between different areas. it slows you down tremendously. So in our case, I want to give an example and a shout out to Alessandro, who we brought on early as one of the early engineers. And the first challenge he tackled was, kind of leading the kind of community product that we have, right, to power our community, the digital community that we have. And so in that scenario, we actually didn't have a PM, we didn't have a product person. And there was a lot of stakeholders. It was a difficult scenario for communicating. And he just took that on and was able to communicate super effectively and build things that, were pragmatic, build things that brought value. And we just had that massive push within 6 months or so. So that's an example of, a person that maybe if they just purely had engineering skills, the coding skills would just completely fall apart in that scenario.
Yeah, it's a critical skill. And I want to ask another question around the current environment. So maybe there's some founders that are listening, and maybe they're in a situation where, look, they went out to go raise some money. They struggled a bit. They've had to lay some people off. Maybe they're struggling, taking longer to find product market fit than, they'd hoped. And things are a little bit, let's call it an environment that's a little kind of a lot of uncertainty and, difficult moment. I've heard of examples like this where the best engineer in the team is starting to get worried, and then they come and they say, "Look, I don't think this is working. I think, I'm not feeling great about where we are." And then they ask for, a 30% increase because they're just feeling, insecure about the situation. What would you say to someone that is not 100% happy and then just ask for, some kind of demand there on increased salary kind of out of the blue because things aren't going as well?
Yeah, it's tough at early stage, so you might have to make some compromises, of course, because the show must go on. But ideally, I'm with kind of Netflix on that their philosophy of just being on top of it all the time and treating people all the time the most, the fairest way possible, paying them the fairest salary you can, making it very clear what's the trade-off between maybe compensation and equity, early stage and things like that. Because the reality is if folks kind of have that demand, that means there's something that's not connected, in the past. It's something that was not negotiated, something was not communicated correctly, and they don't understand the trade-offs that they made when joining the team. Also, it sounds like, in this scenario, if a person just approaches it from that side, it kind of shows maybe a lack of a little bit of entrepreneurial mentality. Is like, hey, we're building this together. I took a bet on the company, and if the company's struggling, going asking for more money is just not the right move. But yeah, I think in general, my philosophy is that it's working super hard as leaders and as founders to think about it from even before day zero, in a sense, as you're interviewing, make sure you don't bring people with that mentality on board. It's like, hey, if you're only bringing a person onto the team because you gave them a 15% raise for, from their previous job, that just shows you the motivation there, right? So you want to ideally maybe folks even take a small pay cut, whatever that is, 10-15%, because you're giving them more equity, because they're going to be attached to, a strong purpose. They want to be part of an early team. They want to build things from scratch. So I would say in that situation, if you have additional folks, you might want to just take a hit and realize that it's not the right profile. If that's your only shot right now at making it through these dark times, maybe you can negotiate something for the short term and then kind of build up your team later with the right profiles.
Now, another thing I think about, and this is similar to sales, it's similar to raising a venture fund, but it's not done until it's done. It's not done till the person is officially accepted and they start working. From offer to full commitment and full on board, any strategies to think about if you're a founder and you're you're hiring a key person in your team? One thing that I think we've reflected on is send some swag. If you get some Latitud sandals in the mail all of a sudden after the person's accepted, and you start wearing, and you're at the beach on the weekend in Santos, in Brazil, it's hard to walk back on that that initial agreement of like, hey, I'm joining the team. Obviously, the person needs to be super motivated, and if there's any doubt, then that's not good. But any other thoughts on terms of like bringing it across the finish line for those key hires?
Yeah, like we nerded out hard on this at Escali, for example. I mean, we used to have an office in like a really dodgy area in the center of Sao Paulo, and so like even we would like order Ubers to take people home, so they didn't feel unsafe like coming out of the building maybe late after the interview. We would send like you said, swag to to their building, leave it like at the porteiro. For those who don't know, like in Brazil, you usually have like somebody at the door there, like on the apartment building. We would send like personally, handwritten notes from the founders, so like anything like that, that's an emotional touch. I think in the remote world, the game changes a little bit, but still, connecting with the founders is a must. I always say early stage, like don't outsource this to your team. So like, I hired let's say maybe a senior engineer and they're hiring the team. Make sure in those conversations, make sure you sell the vision, make sure you connect with the person on the purpose and on the emotional level, and not just like, hey, like nuts and bolts, this is what we do. This is your responsibility. That's the stack. And, this is your salary. People with early stage need to connect to the purpose. They need to be bought in. Like, hey, at Latitude, we hear this over and over. It's like, oh my God, I'm so motivated by helping early stage founders in Latin America. The other trick that startups have up their sleeve, maybe against some of the larger companies, also is talking to investors and advisors, right? So if your startup has impressive investors and advisors, have them chat with these top folks that you feel like maybe on the fence, because I can almost guarantee you those people do not have access to that kind of those kind of people where they are right now. They may be at Gympass or Quinto Andar or whatever, any other of these large startups, but they probably are not talking to their investors. And those maybe the same investors that you have, as those folks, maybe the advisors, maybe people that built 3-4 companies already successfully. So people realize that like, oh, these are the types of folks I'll be chatting with, and they'll be my mentors.
Yeah, I think the strong signal that provides, having a couple of logos from a couple top firms is definitely like a strong signal that probably provides comfort and belief that the company, can be, is well backed and well supported. I was in a session yesterday with Angie, who is one of our mentors at Latitude, and she's she was head of people at early days of Mercado Libre and OLX, and then also working at Kazek. And I think that one thing that she said last night when we were kind of hanging out, is that there's 3 things that matter. It's persona, propósito, y progreso. Those are the three things that people care about, right? The people, the purpose, and the progress. And so I think addressing those 3 things are really important. Of course, there's a bunch of subcategories there in progress. Like, what does that exactly mean? But people want to work with really high caliber people. I think that's something that we've seen. We've brought on some new people recently, and they, admire the other people that we work with and look up to them, or, feel like they're going to be able to learn something from them. And so I think that's providing, an opportunity to develop yourself because of the people you're surrounding yourself by is, I think, a really important component, particularly in engineering, right? Where the motivation to learn is very driven. It's the obviously money is an important one, but if you look at the list, and this is something that I typically do when I'm recruiting someone, is I try to discover what the things they care about. I ask them to write it down in an Excel spreadsheet. I ask them to stack rank it, and then I ask them to assign a multiple on number 1, 1.5, number 2, 1.4, and then create a little, calculation to understand what they actually value and be able to compare that with other opportunities. But I think that, particularly in engineering, the opportunity to learn and work with really smart people is probably the biggest motivator from what I've seen.
Yeah, I think doing that framework that you mentioned of having folks like go through their reasoning is brilliant, because ironically, most people don't have clarity on this. They're just kind of like going from one company to another, maybe from one job to another. They may not be fulfilled, but they don't know exactly why. They don't know exactly what they're looking for. So just giving them that framework actually helps them sit down and be honest with themselves about exactly what they're looking for and what they value. So yeah, I think that's brilliant. And the way I look at it, you mentioned about the team. I mean, in Brazil we say gente boa traz gente boa, right? Like good people bring good people. And so I look at the team as almost like a gravitational pull. So the more amazing folks you add, the stronger the gravitational pull is, and the more amazing people get attracted. It also works the other way around. So if you take those shortcuts, right, coming full circle to the beginning of our conversation, if you take those shortcuts and you're like, oh, well, I'm short on time, short on this, maybe I, hire a person that I know is not that amazing. The next amazing person will look at the team and say, I don't know if I want to work with those folks. I don't know if I can learn from them, right? So, of course, early stage, you have to survive and do whatever it takes. But when you make those trade-offs, you have to be super aware of how you're setting yourself up for the future.
Yeah, you've mentioned before that a good middle ground is, if you're unsure, is hire them on a project basis or to deliver on, and I think that's a smart one. And regarding the framework that you mentioned, I actually learned that from my former CTO. So because when I was recruiting him, he did that for himself. And I was like, this is a brilliant framework. I was like, I'm going to use this on every single hire that I make from now on. And it's, and it's funny. And it's very similar to like just the traditional like sales process where you discover what people value, right? And then you identify if you're able to deliver on that. And, it's a great kind of discovery process for the person. And then also it gives you the points that you can highlight as, if you're trying to persuade somebody, if you're trying to sell them on a bunch of things that they don't care about, or, promote certain things that they don't value, you're gonna be wasting your breath.
Yeah. I think just being radically candid with people during the process is also super important. I see companies kind of misinterpret information, and the candidates misinterpret information, and like nothing gets kind of said. It's sort of this weird dance where, you don't say much, you ask the questions, the person doesn't know if the answer is actually hitting the spot, and then you kind of walk your separate ways. Be super candid with the candidate about what's happening, how the team's received it, what the concerns are. And then, they'll feel the same with you, and they'll share the concerns about the company. I love another thing we do, like super tactical, right? With offers, is like before we tell the offer to the person, we say, hey, aside from the compensation, is there anything else that's on your mind? Is there anything about the team, the purpose? So that really kind of isolates that question and becomes clear to the person, like, hey, like everything is amazing, and I'm only making a choice based on this like sort of monetary criteria, So like whether I can join this amazing mission, if I can kind of make it work financially, versus not having that clarity. So yeah, I like that tactical thing that we do in the offers.
Yeah, I think that is a really important thing. And it's something that I learned in my first kind of sales job when I was 19, is really just, repeating the reasoning why, if someone is, unsure about what they're, and their concerns, and then isolating those concerns, and then, trying to address those concerns. There's a process that you can do. Just have better communication. So that's something that I think makes sense when you're having that discussion. Let's talk a little bit more about, building strong foundations for teams. And I think that one of the things that I recall from your days at Escale is that you had quite a diverse team with different backgrounds. And, so what are some effective ways to increase diversity in tech hiring? That's something that is quite, on the top of minds of a lot of people. But it's, something that I think people don't really, they might not value. They might think is something that is more charitable work, which, in our case at Latitude, we believe that it actually just enriches the opportunity and provides a stronger team. So love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah. So just a quick benchmark, the average number, I would say, in Brazil is around 5% of engineers are women. At Escale, we had 35% women on the engineering team. So like that was, way above the average. And I think it's even above the average of like the international benchmarks. I don't think I've done it like single-handedly. So, definitely a shout out to the team there. Escale is a very diverse organization. I felt a lot of support. So, we had during the process strategically, we had, female recruiters that would like make the candidate comfortable. We nerded out on the language of the job posts and things like that, just to make sure that we were not isolating those candidates. But it's an uphill battle. It's super tough for a small team, right? So if you go back to that number, like it's only 5%, women and engineers in Brazil. Like then, probably is similar across Latam. And okay, if you're building a small team, like maybe 5 or 6 folks, it's really, really hard to guarantee that kind of like 50-50 split. I think hopefully the founders already thought about this problem before, and hopefully they already have diverse networks from previous companies and previous experiences, and then tapping into that is easier. So hey, like I had some female engineers on the teams that I worked at, I can reach out to them, ask for referrals, or ask them if they'd be willing to join. And then some of the tactical things we do during the hiring process is we proactively reach out to diverse candidates. We want to make sure that there's a certain percentage of them in the pipeline. And if we don't get them, inbound, then we go out and proactively look. And that's the same thing we do for the fellowship, right? So we go out and proactively look for female entrepreneurs, and the same thing for the fund, LPs. And then, even if you have a pipeline, just simple things like reaching out to the diverse candidates first, giving them that head start, and making sure you kind of prioritize those candidates is a simple thing you can do to increase the chances of bringing diversity into your team.
How do you think it makes the team better?
I think at a very fundamental level, we're building solutions for other people, right? And so if the society is diverse, which it is, especially if you just look at gender, 50% women and men, then if you have a product team that's only men, it'd be very difficult to build a solid product for the society, right? For your users. So you're basically just baking in those limitations into the product, into your thinking. A good example of that is like, Facebook had this a while back when they mentioned they were launching the product in India, and then having folks from India on the team actually allowed them to catch some of the mistakes in the copy and the approach, because some of the things they had in the product were going to be perceived negatively in that market. And they just like quickly fixed that, right? So recognizing that the products are being built for that diverse society, and then you need a diverse team to tackle that challenge, like, in 360 kind of.
Wrapping up here, Yuri, let's talk about, or get your perspective on, the evolving kind of tech trends, what's happening, what's coming, and then maybe a little bit more on what's on tap for Latitude this year.
Yeah, the big trends for me that I watch are the AI things that are happening, right? Like AI related projects. I mean, we see the ChatGPT coming out. We see kind of Microsoft working with those folks. We see, Google kind of like reacting to that. Go ahead, Brian.
No, I was going to say it's no secret that Microsoft also owns GitHub, right? Which is kind of interesting, right? It's kind of an interesting thought.
Microsoft has changed dramatically from the time that I was kind of like early engineer in my career. With the new CEO, they've just been making extremely strategic moves. Yeah, so I think
developers. No, just kidding.
Yeah, they've moved on. They've moved on from that to very like they've invested a lot in open source and cloud and AI, and they partnered with OpenAI very early, right? So a lot of the infrastructure that powers OpenAI is provided by Microsoft. So anyways, I think AI is definitely going through a huge transformation right now. Google is reacting to that, and I'm sure we'll see a lot of other folks, because it kind of sets the bar, right? So now that we see what's possible, a lot of other companies will jump in and also like thrive on that opportunity.
Do you think we're going to see a huge amount of AI companies get funded without like really strong fundamentals, because a lot of the investors don't understand the applications, or, since it's such a new territory? I wonder if it's, we're going to see kind of a little bit of an artificial boom here, because, it's kind of like you throw AI in front or at the end, and then, all of a sudden, it's very hard. Like, it's very hard to assess as an investor, if what the technology said can be done is actually done, or having the impact that you think it will. So are we in for a rude awakening in terms of a lot of investors just riding a wave when there hasn't really been really clear practical applications about business models associated with this yet?
Yeah, I think it's definitely possible to a certain degree. We saw that with crypto, right? Like there was a lot of activity, and it's really hard to understand if that's a practical application of the technology behind it. You have to dive pretty deeply, and I think that sets very product minded or technical investors apart from the rest. And so if I was to give a tip to investors that are planning on investing in those companies, definitely looking for advisors, right? Bringing folks closer to actually know, and having like a close network of advisors that could actually look at the company and be like, okay, yeah, this is the real deal. And hopefully those folks work on AI at like solid companies that have deep roots in that, with Google and OpenAI and so on and so forth, or maybe even some academia folks. But yeah, definitely possible that we'll see some of that bubble explode. And I think Sam Altman from YC put it well. It's like, if you have any company that says, we do AI for blah, it's like usually not a good sign. Usually people that do AI on a very deep level, they try to hide it more than speak about it openly, because it's like a huge advantage that they have. So if they have, like 3 professors from Carnegie Mellon on the team working on some deep machine learning stuff, they usually try not to highlight that too much. So they say, like we're improving the speed of delivery, for food or something like that. So just be mindful of, the opening act. If the AI is written on all the slides, maybe there's something, that's not right.
That's counterintuitive, but it makes a lot of sense when you say it. It's kind of. Well, listen, Yuri, it's been a great chat. Any last words you want to share about what's on tap for Latitude?
Yeah, I mean, we're super excited about expanding our company formation product, Latitude Go. We've had great traction with it with founders. Founders love it, and basically it allows you to spin up offshore structures for startups. Currently in Brazil, we'll also expand that to other countries. So we're going to double down on that, add more use cases. We've added tostadas, what we call them, which is usually do a Cayman sandwich, which is a Cayman structure. And we're doing now a Delaware structure, which is kind of like a lighter, cheaper structure for folks to get started. And then what we've been hearing from founders is there's a lot of challenges once they get the structure set up to kind of get going with the financial stack, right? It's like, how do we, manage, how to take the money, how do we kind of send the money to the local operating company, how do we manage that? So we've been looking at that space, and we're working on that, and there'll be something exciting coming out from Latitude this year.
Thanks, Yuri. Great to chat. Thanks for popping on, and really enjoying all the stuff we're working on, and exciting stuff in the oven. So we'll talk soon. All right.
Sounds good, Brian. Good to be here.